disturbingly fascinating. Improved it actually. And labeling that book as a historical still hurts. This was a big ol' oof for me. It's a personal pet peeve. Hey y'all, it's Nat. Hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my, what month was it? July wrap up. Alright, before we get into anything bookish, make sure to like and subscribe down below and tell me in the comments what's the best book you read in July. So this is a bit of a different filming setup for me on a wrap up because I currently have COVID. Although I don't feel too bad, I just don't have a ton of energy, but I need to get this filmed. Meaning, we're making this easy on myself. I'm getting set up at my desk. I've got some tea. We're just gonna make this like an easy breezy, cozy wrap up as I walk you through the reviews for all the books I read this month. But first, let's talk about my stats. So starting at the top, I read 12 books in July, and across those, I read 3,347 pages. That does include converting audiobook hours, 2 pages, but when it comes to audiobook hours, I was at about 43 hours. Honestly, this is a surprisingly low number. My average rating for the month was 3.83 stars. Not too bad. Felt right in the middle. I did unfortunately have a 1 DNF, however. Then when it comes to genres, starting at the top, I read 2 fantasy books. I read 1 comic and then 1 historical, and labeling that book as a historical still hurts. 2 horror, 3 manga, and then 3 romances. Next up are the little goals that I keep for myself. Obviously, from looking at my genres, you can see that I read not only a comic and also a manga. Unfortunately, though, I did not read a nonfiction book. I started into one. I also started into a book that was more than 450 pages. However, that was the book that I did not finish. So this is like a half point, basically. When it comes to tracking my series, I'm actually pretty happy with this month's numbers. I did start into 1 series. I read 4 continuations. I finished out another series and then made the decision that I will not be continuing on with a final series. And lastly, how many books did I read off of my owned TBR? Luckily, this month it was 5. I wish it was a little bit more, but still pretty decent. Now, before diving into reviews, little reminder, I only review books in my wrap-ups that I did not talk about in dedicated videos, though surprisingly, I did not have any dedicated videos coming out in July, but I did do a fair amount of reading for videos that'll be coming out in the future. So I'm only going to be talking about 8 books today rather than the 12 that I read, and we're going to go through these based on ratings. Starting out, unfortunately, with the pick for the Book Dragons book club that I am a member of. I'll have a link to our live show in the cards up above if you're intrigued for some more spoilery and fun thoughts. But we read Next Time Will Be Our Turn by Jessie Q. Sutanto, and this is that historical book that pains me to say it's historical, but it is due to the setup of the story. So in this, we alternate back and forth between a future timeline and then a timeline that starts in the 90s and then is relatively more contemporary. The matriarch of this family is telling her life story and how she fell in love with her first girlfriend to her granddaughter. This was a big ol' oof for me. I liked the idea of the story. I really enjoyed the themes that were woven into it. I liked the setup of it. That's about where my positives really end. It's really weird to me that I was impressed by the writing in this story, specifically around how the themes were woven throughout and how some of them were dived into. But at the same time, I did not really enjoy the storytelling process of the main character's experiences. So much of this book was tell instead of show to a very extreme degree, which I blame for making the pacing of the book drag and my difficulty with connecting to the main character. And it was so frustrating because there was a lot of really good little nuggets in this book, but it just didn't come together in the way that I was really wanting. I also have an issue with the fact that this book is marketed as a romance. That is the top genre for this book on Goodreads. I personally did not label it as a romance. As you can see, this was a historical story because though romantic relationships are a very important part of this book, how this book ends means it is not a romance. That's all I can really say without getting into too many spoilers. So unfortunately, this one came out to 2.5 stars. I'm still bummed about it. I wanted to like this more, but I actually kind of had to force myself to finish it. Next up was a book for my Buns and Roses TBR jar challenge. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put a link to my playlist up above. But I read Miss Hawthorne's Unlikely Husband by Addy Dulac. This is the 3rd in her Troublemakers trilogy. And in it, we are following the final of this friendship group, Elodia. She has been in love with her best friend Ada's older brother Richard since they were schoolgirls, and now that she actually is of age and is being pushed to try and find a husband, she decides now is the time to finally confess her feelings to him. Unfortunately, though, her timing isn't really great, and so Richard sort of shoots her down, not only because he has never looked at Elodia in a romantic way, but also because they're from different classes and it would be messy. However, this kind of spurs Elodia to do a little bit of an investigating in her own life. It kind of turns her view of her family upside down. I enjoyed Elodia as a main character. I thought she was really sweet and funny and was able to stand up for herself. I thought the way she was planning everything out to confess to Richard was really adorable, even though it sort of all gets tossed in the air and instead she just ends up having a bumbling mess of a confession. But I also loved that scene because of what it elicited from Richard, the hero. I really enjoyed seeing through his eyes, watching him reevaluate their relationship, all of their interactions, and seeing them in this new light that he's never really considered before. Plus the drama that happens in both their backgrounds that goes on and sort of affects the way they come into this relationship did keep me invested, kept me really intrigued to see like what's going to happen next and how are they going to work this out. Unfortunately, when these two became a couple, I started to have issues. First off, in Elodia's character, I felt like the way she was being characterized did not match with what we kept being told about her character. Then when it comes to Richard, we see that he has some traumatic experiences in prior relationships that make him very hesitant to open up. And so there's a lot of difficulties when it comes to being emotionally intimate with Elodia. But I really wish that would have been resolved before these two got freaking married. I actually did enjoy how like that element was resolved in the end of the book, but again, it felt like that was something that should have been worked out a lot sooner. Like I said, I was very invested into the drama, and once we hit the conclusion, I was like hooked in. I really liked how a certain plot line rounded up for Richard's character because it actually makes the series on the whole feel like it came full circle. I had read the first book in this series following Richard's little sister Ada, but coming off of that, I do sort of wish Ada and Regina, the other best friend, were more prevalent in this book, especially with some of the hesitations and like insecurities that Elodia was experiencing. I really think having those two there would have helped it. And then finally, one issue that always drops a star for me when it comes to romance books, it's a personal pet peeve. I don't mind a virgin heroine in a romance book, but when they are completely unaware and naive about anything in regard to sex, it instantly rips me out of the story. And as I said, I had to drop it down a star for that. So this was a 3-star. I did enjoy it on the whole, but there was issues I definitely had that I think if it had been reworked a little bit, this would have gone much better for me. Another Buns N' Roses book I also read this month was from a favorite of mine, Cecilia Rene, and I read The Magnificent Earl of March, which is the third in this Rake Review series. Basically, there's a different book coming out every month of the year, and I believe each hero is like the focus of this fictitious gossip rag in universe, and the profile that is done by this gossiper ends up actually kicking off their romance. So in this one, we are following Hunt, the Earl of March. He doesn't really want to be an earl. His father was not a great dude and actually wanted to leave the earldom to his nephew. So Hunt basically does the bare minimum in order to take care of his mom and his sister, but apart from that, he's sort of a party boy. However, this evil cousin of his, Augustus, I want to say, is constantly trying to make trouble and really succeeds when he utilizes Hunt's identity in order to seduce this young woman that is coming into society and unfortunately is quite naive. And the two of them end up running away to Scotland to try and get married. But this young woman's older sister, Delia, is not going to let that happen, is going to save her sister's reputation. So she goes to try and confront the Earl of March, which is the actual character Hunt, and the two of them figure out what is happening and decide to try and race to Scotland to stop these two from getting married. But this cramped carriage ride is filled with a lot of tension, and I really enjoyed this. I'm not really an Insta-less person, honestly, and this definitely falls into that category, but somehow I was still very invested into both of the main characters and actually really hoping for this romance. I wasn't necessarily sold that they were in love by the end of the book because it's been like a week or two, but I was definitely convinced that feelings had developed here and that they were trying to make something work. I thought both of them had really well developed backgrounds that were explored and also made perfect sense for why they made certain decisions or chose certain actions when it came to the relationship that's developing between the two of them. At the start, there's a lot of banter, there's a lot of sniping at each other, which was really fun, but then as they spend more time together, they get closer, they get to know one another more, they start to respect each other even more, and then the spice. Miss Rene knows what she's doing, trust me, this was a good time. So like I said, by the end of the book, I was not necessarily like thinking these two were in love with one another, but I had still been swept off my feet with their romance. So this was a really strong 4-star. And then next, I'm going to kind of put these all together because they're all part of the same series and it's a manga series. So let's just make this easy. I read Kaiju number 8, volume 8, 9, and 10 by Naoya Matsumoto. I've been really enjoying this series so far. We are following Kafka, who has always wanted to be a member of this Kaiju defense task force in Japan. For most of his life, though, he has actually been working as a cleanup crew member, but he finally gets the opportunity when he gets these mysterious new powers, and he is trying to not only find a place for himself on this team, but also try to help people and figure out how these new powers work. So starting at the top of volume 8, honestly, I think this is maybe like my least favorite of the series so far, just because it didn't flow great in terms of the events that were covered, and it also felt like a lot of it was mostly set up for future events, but that doesn't necessarily mean this was a bad volume. I still had a good time with it. I love the characters. I love getting to see more of them. And then, I mean, it did have me itching for the next one. So I went with 4 stars on it. Volume 9 was kind of the same. It also felt like it was a lot of setup for what is coming next, but there was some very solid action going on in this one. So another strong 4-star. However, when we get to volume 10, guys, let's go. This was wild. I really liked how we kind of amped things up when it came to the kaiju, but by extension, like the defense task force is definitely amping things up as well. We're getting some more exploration of a side character that I really enjoy. We're getting to see some of her powering up as well, and I am itching for what is going to come next. I am talking with my hands so much right now. I'm just trying to work out my excitement for the series. So this one, 4.5 stars. I'm loving this series. Ugh, fun fact, the antivirals you take for COVID make your spit taste like chemicals. It is terrible. So next up was one. I knew I was going to enjoy this book. I did not anticipate to love it as much as I did. And that is The Hobbit by j.r.r. Tolkien. I read this with my Geek Squad, which is the book club I host over my Patreon. If you are interested in a spoilery reading blog, I will have a link to my Patreon down below. If you don't know what The Hobbit is, I don't know where you've been living, because I'm impressed. We are following Bilbo Baggins, who is a hobbit that wants to live an easy life, but unfortunately for him gets dragged into this adventure to try and defeat this dragon and steal his treasure, along with a collection of dwarves as well as a wizard. After reading the rest of the Lord of the Rings series and seeing that, like, oh, okay, I actually did enjoy this, I was a lot more hopeful going into this one that I would love it because everything's encapsulated in one book. I do think that is one of the major reasons this went a lot better for me, because at no point did I ever feel like there was any dragging. I never lost momentum with this. I liked Bilbo's character when seeing the films, but this actually made me love Bilbo's character. I appreciated how every chapter sort of feels like its own adventure story, kind of like Percy Jackson, for example, where every chapter is sort of its own adventure, but it all builds up to this final grand plot that's happening. And this was really similar to that, which I think also helped with the pacing and also helped by keeping the stakes on the higher side consistently. The interactions between Sam, Frodo, and Gollum, there we go, lost his name there, were some of my favorite scenes in the Lord of the Rings series. So I also loved the interactions between Bilbo and Gollum that we got to see here, and expand a little bit more around Gollum's character, just because he's really interesting to watch. I don't know what it is about how Tolkien presents him. Disturbingly fascinating. And I mean, part of that may also come down to the fact that I did listen to the audiobook of this read by Andy Serkis again. He just brings these stories to life in the most phenomenal way. I really enjoyed all of the songs that were worked in here. I was very surprised at, given how strong of a cozy fantasy vibe this has, it never really bugged me. And maybe that is because the stakes always felt like they were on the higher side. That is kind of a common issue for me with cozy fantasies, is I feel like I need more stakes, and that was not a problem for me here. This actually made me consider, can I like cozy fantasy? I think if it's done like this, it'll go way better. So all in all, freaking love this. 4.5 stars. I mean, like, did I just find a new cozy comfort reread? Maybe. And last, but certainly not least, the book that I think is going to be my favorite for this month, but also this is definitely going to be a contender for a favorite book of the year. I say that as though The Hobbit is not also a serious contender. Has cemented herself as a favorite author. I read Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison, and the fact that I binged through this freaking book in mostly a single day showcases to you how much I enjoyed it. So in this book, we are following Vesper, who has a really crappy day and then comes home to find a wedding invite from her cousin, who is more like a sister to her, and her ex-boyfriend. But if that was not a slap in the face enough, her family is actually a cult. And technically speaking, because Vesper left, she is not supposed to be acknowledged by the this cult. So it's sort of a confusing possible welcome back, and Vesper decides to go. Of course, when she returns home, things are a little bit more complicated than she was anticipating. This was an absolute freaking banger. This had so many things that I personally love to see in horror together, and just the way it was done with Rachel Harrison's writing made it work so perfectly for me. I loved the way the story unfolded. I really enjoyed watching Vesper's character develop and grow throughout this. She starts out and she is not particularly likable, but there's just something about her that you kind of have to admire because she wears that unlikability in such a great way. I did call a relatively big twist in this book pretty early on, but like that never even really impacted my enjoyment of the story. If anything, it might have improved it actually because it helped to keep my intrigue really high. Honestly, my only complaint with this book is probably the final confrontation scene between Vesper and her mom. I wanted a little bit more. I wanted to like really watch that play out some more. How it's done just feels a little bit incomplete, but oh my god, like everything else with it was so good. Really enjoyed watching these complicated and like downright ugly family dynamics play out. The shifting perspective Vesper has on not only her family members, her growing up, her maturing, the way her relationships have shifted, how her family members see her, coping mechanisms coming off of some of these experiences, religious trauma, and like the way family members can use religion to try and control you, and the complications of like trying to break away from those, breaking some of these cycles. Like all of that I felt was so well done, and the way it was presented and explored with this story was great. I had such a fantastic time with it. Miss Harrison just does not miss for me. So this was 4.5 stars. Like I said, that tiny little bit I wish would have been a little different, but everything else was so good. I really, really liked this. All right, and on that note, that's officially it for today, y'all. So, yeah, I'm tired. My brain's officially crapping out. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let's leave that the head with the talking emoji. Let's leave that in the comments down below. I've got links to all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me down in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!